Welcome to the Church Explained podcast. We really appreciate you joining us. The Church Explained podcast is a conversation to develop your leadership and grow your church. Our goal in this podcast is to share inspirational insights and ideas to resource leaders, churches and teams through our conversation with key team players at Icon Church and other guests. In this episode, we're going to have a conversation around the future of Multisite Church. Hi, I'm Dave Mckeown.
And I'm Nathan Benger.
And we're the hosts of the Church Explained podcast. Today we're joined with our lead pastor, Paul Benger. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the future of Multisite Church.
It's great to be here.
It's good to be here.
Nathan.
You're back again.
Yeah.
Back again.
Can't get rid of him, can't we?
2 episodes on the trot.
No.
Hey, great to have you here, Paul. We're so excited to talk about this. For people who don't know you and maybe missed the last episode, let's just give them a little bit of a recap of you and the church as well. Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. So I'm obviously the lead pastor with my wife, Jeannie, of Icon Church. We planted the church 34 years ago. So it's been going. We're now we call it a multi-campus church. We're talking multi-site, which is the same thing, but we've just renamed it to multi-campus church with 6 campuses, including an online campus. So 5 physical campuses and just online as well. Been married for 37 years. I hope that's right. If Jeannie's listening, and we've got three children, 3 boys. Nathan, who's here, and Joshua and Sam, who's also here but behind cameras, and then 3 grandchildren as well. So we love life and we love building the church.
Yeah, and such a great church, Icon Church. We're privileged to be part of it, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely.
So, hey, one of the questions we have here, just thinking about multi-site or multi-campus, is why have you chosen that model? You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question actually. Why choose that model? I think there's a couple of things I would say. First of all, I think obviously we planted Icon Church, and I think it was always in our heart to plant other churches. And I guess when we planted Icon Church as a new church plant 34 years ago, we just thought that we'd send some people, maybe send 30 people, 50 people, however, start a new church and let them go. But we began to see the benefits really of staying connected, and in not just and more than just friendship, and the benefits of being one church and running 2 sites. And I think also what helped us is initially when we started we had 1 service, but then we went to double services, then we went to triple services, and we thought, well, if you can do 3 services, you could do 2 sites.
Yeah.
And 4 services, or you could do 3 sites and 5 services. And one other thing I would think about leadership development, we've been I'm thankful to God that we've developed a great batch of leaders, and who are sons and daughters of the house. Well, we could just send them off and they could just go and follow the call of God on their life, and I'm privileged that they've got the call of God. But actually, that sense of staying in relationships, staying as sons and daughters, staying as partners and co-workers. I love that phrase when Paul uses it in the New Testament, co-workers together.
Yeah.
The model for me, just fit our heart to continue as family and as co-workers for the kingdom of God.
If I was to jump off the back of that,
Yeah.
because I think that's a key thing actually, just to recognise, because there may be churches listening and so a lot of our leaders were raised through our youth ministry. You call them sons and daughters of the house. They came through our youth ministry, and very much our past would have been at 18, they go off to university, and it's very rare if they come back.
Yeah.
Whereas when we were able to do like a multi-site, obviously we were in places of universities, but it helped them attach themselves to a vision, which I think was a key for us.
So many of them chose to do university close.
Yep.
So to either do Sheffield, which is, you can commute easily to Chesterfield, where we started. We now have a campus in Sheffield. Some others chose Derby again, which is fairly close. And so they chose to do that so they could stay connected. But also this, I mean, Dave, I mean, you were leading a church with 2 campuses.
Yeah.
And you decided, let's join together in with Icon Church, and we become together, and we've become co-workers together. So it's not just the sons and daughters of the house, it's other people who have the same heart, the same culture, the same fit. And like for us, it's a model not without challenges. There's some massive challenges, but it's actually a model where just this great team of people can work together to see the kingdom of God go forward.
And we'll maybe pick that up in another episode as we talk about the possibility of mergers and what that looks like for people, because it can be a frightening thing for churches to think, should we merge, what's the benefits? That's another episode. Let me just pick up on what you were saying there, Nathan, about people going to university. So was it strategic in the sense of planting in those areas or starting other sites in those areas? Where there was universities, did that come into your thinking?
No, I don't think initially we were thinking of that. We were looking at our region and praying. And
so you didn't just say, okay, there's a university there, let's start a campus.
No, not at all. And we perhaps should have done. But
definitely.
I mean, initially we had a few people from towards Derby travelling to Chesterfield, and just this heart to plant again, to start something new, and to send some of our guys out that we trained. And interestingly, we trained them through one of these multi-services, giving them a service, you look after that service. So that's how we trained a team of people.
So that's great. Let's just pull that out a little bit, because I think if people grab that was the training ground, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So people will be thinking, well, I want to start a church, but like maybe the thing is to start another service, train some people, and then release them, as you're saying.
Yeah, and that's exactly how we did it. We gave our 6:30 service as it was then. We now moved that to 6 p.m. He had
dangerous that.
I know he had a team of people, and then after a period, I can't remember however long, we got this heart and a few people, as I say, travelling from Derby. Let's do something in Derby. So that team went and did something midweek for a year, and then after around a year, we launched. They kind of moved and let's do Sundays. So
and we repeated that again with Sheffield. In terms of Mark and Nicola, who lead Sheffield, they were leading our 9:15 a.m. service, early risers. Yeah. But again, it was the same model, and we just tweaked. We didn't do midweeks as long in Sheffield because we'd learned some of the lessons from Derby. Yeah.
I suppose one of the questions I've been thinking of, and it's something for any of us to discuss this, is there a biblical model for it? Because a lot of people will think, well, first of all, is it in the Bible? Should we do it if it's not in the Bible? What's our thoughts? Is there a biblical model on multi-campus?
Great question. Some people argue quite strongly there isn't, that it's actually non-biblical. I would say there is, but I would say it looked very different.
Yeah.
But everything looked very different 2,000 years ago. Worship looked very different 2,000 years. Absolutely everything. Elders, leadership teams, the whole thing looked different. So where's the biblical model then, people would say? Well, I would say if you think about the church, let's say in Jerusalem, you would have a leadership, an eldership, they would call it, I would guess, in that first century. But you would have people meeting in different locations as a church grew. In some of the cities, maybe they just had one location, one house. And it was usually the house of a wealthy person who would have a courtyard or a roof where, a number of people, let's say 30, 40 people plus could gather in there. And then in Jerusalem, as the church grew, they would have several of these, the same in Ephesus. Some people estimate that, by the time, we get into the 60s of the first century, the 70s, the church in Ephesus is around 10,000 people. Well, that was one church, but they would be meeting, they didn't have a big arena for ultimately, they would be meeting in different houses. And Paul calls them churches.
Yeah.
Because there's a phrase where he says, "Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the church that meets at their house." And that would be probably a church, we don't know exactly, but probably a church of between 50 and 150 people would gather, depending on the size of Priscilla and Aquila's house.
Yeah, very good. Good.
Yeah.
Great answer there,
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
I think, as you say, people will either say, yeah, there is,
Yeah.
the multi-site model there in the Bible, or it's not. In one sense, I was thinking of the fact that even if it wasn't in the Bible, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, though, does
No.
it? Do you know what I mean?
No.
Because people say, well, we've got to look back to Acts chapter 1, Acts
Yeah.
chapter 2, and if it's not there, we shouldn't do it. But I don't think that's the way.
Do you think we get stuck
I think we do.
trying to find
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think you're trying to look back and trying to find it
Where
there.
the principle is the key.
That's the
that you
point.
then contextualize.
Yeah.
So I don't think everybody should do it because it doesn't fit their context. There's countries in the world where multi-site, the way we're doing, is just would never fit their context, but it could fit ours. The other thing I would say is that even across a region, you would have apostolic figures
Yes.
who would minister in different churches. So Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he says something like this. He says, although you've got 10,000 guardians in Christ, I think he uses 10,000,
Yeah.
he said, I became your father.
Yeah.
And so there was something special about Paul's ministry into a group of churches across a region. That is clear when you think of his missionary journeys, some of which, the latter ones, were to go back and strengthen the churches that had been planted. So the churches that he'd started, he still had that
He
relationship.
still had the connection, didn't he?
Yeah, he had the connection. He
Yeah.
was writing letters to them. But then on one of the trips, he decides, I'm going to go back and just go one by one and just strengthen them on a journey. So I think that connection is strongly there.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think a couple of things then just to pull out is, when we think of multi-site, like people have different ideas, whether we call it multi-site or multi-campus. There'll be different ideas out there. Some churches or some leaders may say, I'll never do that because it means every church needs to be the same, almost like a franchise model. Would we agree with that? I mean, is that true? Does every church that we're planting or sending out, or whatever language we use, do they need to be the same?
Well, we've not thought so. We've not thought so in terms of identical in the way that some have done this. I mean, Nathan and I, a few years ago, visited some great churches, actually, in America, who have very much done that model, even with their buildings.
Yeah.
So, that they said, if you walk in the building and you turn left, it's kids' work. And that's true of every building. If you walk in the building and you look over there, the wall's red. And that's true in every building. They've really gone that well. And I think that's great for them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But we certainly have not, in terms of the way we've built, thought that. But we haven't also said, well, get on and do your own thing. So the way that it's almost like a spectrum, where at the one end you've got the church I've just explained. This is a Church Explained podcast, so it's a good thing to do that. The church I've just explained in America, and then you've got the other end where, it's just go and, do whatever and we'll stay connected. I think we're more towards, I guess, this end of being unified. So we have got a common leadership across all our campuses.
Yeah.
And then we've got local leadership that work out our vision and our values contextually. And contextually can mean in terms of, are you in a city, are you in a village, are you in a town? But contextually can also mean the congregation size. So there's things that we can do, let's say in our Chesterfield campus.
Which is the central one.
Central campus, we can't do elsewhere.
Yeah.
And but we can still do something meaningful in those other campuses as well. And they can still have our vision, they can still have our values, and they can still feel like Icon Church. Because Icon Church is about our vision and our values.
Yeah.
How do we, so like just delving into that a little bit deeper for someone maybe who's listening, practically, how do we keep, so like there's a common leadership. That's what we call our core leaders. And then we have our campus pastors who are not in that kind of core leadership, how do we keep them on the vision and values and, you know, kind of carrying that culture into every campus?
Yeah, well, we have regular meetings, and every meeting, so we have so there's our core team, which is, I guess, our biblical eldership, you would call that. And then there's our core campus team, which brings the campus pastors in and expands that core team to them. And we meet with them regularly. And every Wednesday we have a staff meeting that they're a part of, and we have a particular segment of that is just for them. And every week we talk about something to do with our values, something to do with the way we think, something to do with the way we operate. And we then discuss practically how we're going to outwork what the church is doing in this season. So, you know, this week we were thinking about Vision Sunday is coming up.
Yeah.
And had we, you know, we're all online because of we're still in lockdown, but had we not been in lockdown, we'd be saying, how are we going to make Vision Sunday special in your campus, in every campus?
Yeah.
How's it going to work for you in your context? We can do this here, but what can we do everywhere else? And so we would work on that together, and we would do that. Do that work together constantly. So we're having those conversations all the time.
So that's great in the sense of like it's a shared vision, shared leadership that pulls the thing together almost as one family, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
But let me just pull it out a little bit further if I can. Like what are the challenges? Because people may be listening or watching. And there certainly is challenge. So what are the challenges that we think of multi-site or multi-campus?
Well, I think some of the big challenges, one is that cultural challenge.
Keeping the culture.
Keeping the culture and keeping what matters. I think because our leadership is so united across our campuses, I don't think we've hit any major challenges.
Yeah.
But I think that can be when churches move this way, if they've not got that level of unity, connectedness, that's a great word, actually. If they've not got that, that becomes the biggest challenge, and that becomes the most destructive element, not having that. I think a second challenge can be around the people in the campus, because they just want their campus to be great, and they just want their needs to be met. So it's usually fairly easy to get leaders on a big vision, but the person sat in the pew, we'll call it, let's say in Derby, what is concerned about what's happening to Derby, what's happening to me.
That's true.
And so the bigger picture, getting them to see the bigger picture and see the one church.
How do you do that?
Well, like I feel, I don't know what you two feel, but I feel that the whole pandemic lockdown has really helped us. Helped us because we've had to do most things as one church. So it's really helped us. It's helped people see that we're one church, but also we've discovered some things that actually we can do together, and when we do them together, they're better. So like prayer meetings would be my classic example. The prayer meeting we did, not the last one, the one before, which was the first one when we did all together, and we could do a little bit of in person, we did a little bit on Zoom, and we broadcast the whole thing to YouTube. It was the best prayer meeting in 34 years of our church. Because it felt like we were one big church across multi-campuses, and, you know, it was really good. I say that was better than the last one because the last one we couldn't have the in-person element. We were locked down, but we did the same thing. We did the Zoom and we did the broadcast.
Which was fantastic, really.
Yes.
I mean, let's just pull that out a little bit further in the sense. So we had the one family stuff has been fantastic across the COVID stuff. Not the COVID's been fantastic, how you say that. But this idea of we've been able to create that one family. But I suppose for somebody, you know, let's say a leader's thinking, right, we're going to do multi-site, we're going to start another campus. I think they need to be careful in the sense of if they think that everybody in that campus on the ground, let's say, for example, at Derby or somewhere like that, has to be thinking of the central or the bigger picture. You know, I think once they go down that way, actually, they make a mistake in one sense, because they're not going to, are they? That person sitting in the pew, as we've used that language, they're not really so fussed of what's happening on the big picture level. And I think church leaders make the mistake of wanting them to be so concerned.
Yes.
And when they're not concerned, they think they haven't bought into the vision.
That's true.
And I don't think that's true. I think if they've bought into the vision at that campus and they have a bigger interest on what's happening in the bigger picture, it's fantastic. But even if they don't, the responsibility of a multi-site church or a campus is to serve those people on the ground,
Yes.
not to get them to think of, here's what we're doing all over the place.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's true. You won't fix that fully. I think the more that you can get people to see the big picture, the better. Because another
Definitely.
challenge is finance.
Yeah.
Because
that should be in bold writing there. I shouldn't have realised what you're saying. Finance.
It is an expensive thing to
Yeah.
run. It's not a cheap thing to
No.
run multi-campus. You've got to finance some central resources that will serve everything. And often that is the bit that gets confusing. And so I've worked with some churches and people are saying, why are we giving all this money to central resources?
Yeah.
When we want to do stuff in our city or our town.
Yeah.
Well, the point is that is enabling you, in this model to do that. And so sometimes the financial challenge and people just seeing their own interests can be a difficulty.
And I think for anyone who's listening, we talked about, starting Derby. I think, and we talk about the bigger picture and the vision, and there are people who just here's we've mentioned Derby.
Yeah.
Here's Derby. Here's Sheffield. I'm interested in this, but I think the more that you show the benefits,
Definitely.
of being this is bigger than just us.
Yeah.
And you show the benefits personally and also to you as the church, I think people begin to buy into that more.
Yeah.
I think, you show that yes, I get the support. Yes, as a church leader, this enables me, but then also as a church, this enables us to do this, to move forward, to do all of that.
Because they're not starting from scratch, are they? That's the thing. No. In a campus setting, they're going with people resources, or they're going with physical resources. And I think, picking up on that, Nathan, I think that's genius, because really there is some real benefits of being multi-site,
And the support. The support of
I think that's the biggest thing, out of all the things, we can talk about collaboration, we can talk about shared resources, all that stuff, but I think it's that overarching support. And when we send a team or we're, a campus pastor, they're not on their own. And that's the genius of it, isn't it, really?
I mean, you mentioned, Nathan, before we started the conversation, didn't you, about when we started Icon Church. I was 22, I think. Your mum was 21. Passion to start a church. I actually went to some people and said, I need some help because I know what God's called me to do, but I've no idea what I'm doing. But I didn't find the help I could have done with. I've some great people. I have to mention Stuart Bell and the Ground Level Network became very supportive of me. But at that time, initially, I was in another denomination and they said, we've not got anyone who can help you. And so I felt completely alone, and yet, you think of you going to Derby, or you think of, Ben and Hannah coming to Stocksbridge, or, Nathan and April going to Rotherham, Mark and Nicola, who you've mentioned in Sheffield. There's a whole team of us, and real experience and real many years of ministry, great team that actually will work. We're co-workers. We're all in this together. We're all wanting it to succeed. So
there's a lot of stuff there. I think just to wrap up in the sense of, if a church leader's watching, or another team member, and they're thinking about multi-site, I mean, we'd encourage them, contact us, get in contact with us. If we can help you, we will. I think that's our heart, as we've said before in the previous episode, where we talked about Icon Open, sharing our resources. But I suppose the takeaway would be, even if you're not in a multi-site church, make sure you don't do ministry on your own. That's got to be it. Even if you think, well, I'm just called to do this one single church, like make sure you're well connected.
That's-
Because if you're not, you're just causing yourself hassle, really, aren't you?
Yeah, and as you've said, that's the heart behind Icon Open. It's the heart behind the Church Explained podcast. That's part of that. Just want to add value to church, help them grow as leaders, help churches grow as well.
And I'd like to just recap right at the start. We talked about a model, of starting multi-site. We said we just gave someone a responsibility over a service.
Yeah.
You might just think, what's the next step that we can take? Is it, can I start a connect group and can I give someone the responsibility, the service? Can we start a new service? Because you may not be at the multi-site level, but you might be thinking, we want to grow this.
Yeah.
I think there's a next step that you can take.
Yeah.
So
And
good.
leaders always grow when they've got responsibility, not just a task.
Yep.
So it's giving the responsibility, but that's another podcast we could talk about.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have quite a few podcasts coming up. We are excited, as we've said, Church Explained podcast. We're going to have other guests coming in as well. We'll share that at another point. Nathan, you're going to wrap up for us?
Yeah. So that's all for this episode. It's been so good to talk, and thanks, Paul, again for being on the podcast. And that's all. We're going to talk about multi-site on this podcast and what it has to offer. So it's been great to be together. Thanks for listening to the Church Explained podcast. And remember, if you want to support us, then share, like, do whatever you need to do on whatever platform you're consuming this content. It really helps us get the word out there. And why don't you think about somebody that you can share this with, maybe another church leader or someone in your team who would really benefit from this. And let me just mention again to head over to icon.church/open. We have loads of resources on there, and you can sign up for exclusive content for you, your church, and your teams. Well, that's all for now, but we'll see you next episode on the Church Explained podcast, where we're going to talk about youth ministry that builds the church.